I'm Homer Neal, President of the American Physical Society for 2016. I'd like to welcome each of you. The purpose of this session is the award of the Joseph A. Burton Forum Award. And I wonder if I could ask the president of the chair of the forum to come forward. She will, in addition to playing other roles in this session, she has a few early comments to make.
Good morning. Prior to this talk by Secretary Moniz in honor of being the recipient of the Burton Award, I'd like to just make an announcement that later in the week we will be sponsoring a session that's related to this. It's on Thursday at 11:15 a.m. and the title of that session is The Iran Nuclear Deal, Physics, Physicists, and the Historic Agreement. And at that session, we're going to be having experts from MIT, Russia, and Germany giving their perspectives on some of the technical details of this agreement. And so I will turn the floor back over to Dr. Homer, who will make the awards.
Thank you very much, Ariane. This award was originally established in 1975 by the APS Forum on Physics and Society. It was established to promote the public understanding of the relationship of physics and society. The award was subsequently named for Joseph A. Burton to recognize his many contributions to the APS. And in fact, he served as treasurer of the society from 1970 to 1985. The award was endowed later in 1997 by Mrs. Leroy Apker. The award recognizes outstanding contributions to the public understanding or resolution of issues involving the interface of physics and society. I'm pleased to present the 2016 Joseph A. Burton Forum Award to U.S. Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz. The inscription on the award includes the following wording: for outstanding contributions in government, including the advancement of national energy and science policy over 2 decades, and the reduction of the nuclear proliferation threats through key roles in both the disposition of Russian nuclear materials in the 1990s and the negotiation of the nuclear agreement with Iran in 2015. Just a sentence or two of personal reflection. In the height of the controversy surrounding the Iranian negotiations, my wife knew that I was interested in the topic because as a member of the Lounsbury Foundation, she knew that we had been supporting academic exchanges between the U.S. and Iran. And she was puzzled by the fact that I didn't seem to be as concerned as she expected me to be about the ultimate outcome. I told her, don't worry, Ernie is there. So Ernie, if you will come forward, I would present this award. Ernie,
thank you, Ariel. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Do you want to take a picture? Okay.
You should know the award.
I'll take a few more.
So now if we could have a few words from you.
Pleasure. Well, thank you, Homer and Arian. It's a pleasure to be back here with so many familiar faces at an APS meeting again. It's really great. Maybe next year I can start becoming a more regular attendee once again. It really is a great pleasure and honor to receive the Burton Award, celebrating the interface of physics, our community, and society, and especially receiving the award from a community that has done so much over so long a time to be engaged in these important societal issues, including among them, of course, and frankly, fairly prominently for decades, the issues around nuclear security ever since the war, frankly, and certainly where my academic career, first at Stanford and then at MIT, are in fact two of the locations where that focus and those contributions in terms of nuclear security have been very, very strong, and obviously have to a large degree shaped my own engagement in these issues. In fact, I want to just single out one person who, in some sense, I dedicate this award to, and that is Herman Feshbach. This would be Herman's 100th year, and Herman was very much my mentor at MIT. I think he is well known in this group, presumably. Certainly, as APS president, establishing the Human Rights Committee, the Human Rights effort, back in around 1980. Prior to that, he was one of the founders of the Union of Concerned Scientists in Cambridge, and I have leaned upon that organization to recruit my chief of staff, the president of UCS for 10 years, Kevin Knobloch. He also founded, or was a key member, I should say, in founding, and as always, an early chairman or whatever job was needed to be done of POPA here at APS. Herman was, for those of you who know him, an extraordinarily, an exceptional person, incredible passion, and I should have added another thing, actually. At MIT, in our physics department, he was also really the champion for advancing diversity among the faculty, women and minorities. So, just a huge impact. And in fact, I always remember a story repeated by some of you may know Heather Lechterman, a good friend of Herman's at MIT. When Herman stepped down as head of the Department of Physics, it was some viewed it as kind of mysterious that somebody who was so fundamentally irascible was so well liked by everybody, whether they were on the same side or a different side of any issue. And he always said that the secret was, well, first of all, absolutely being principled, and everyone understood that he was always coming from a position of principle. But secondly, that whenever anyone would go to see him, the first word was never no. It was always about, well, let's kind of figure out how we can address this issue. How do we get to yes? And I think that is, hopefully, if anything, I would like to say that that's certainly an approach that I have tried to bring as well to these negotiations. It's a problem-solving mentality. It's something that I think is natural in this community, and it's something that I think is leads to many positive outcomes. My own direct engagement in nuclear security, kind of nuclear issues beyond, basic research, also was Herman. In fact, Homer, you mentioned 2 decades. It's actually 4 decades. In fact, I was a member of the study group, the APS study group on nuclear fuel cycles and waste management, 1977. And I had just started on the faculty at MIT. Herman said, you got to be on this committee. I said, I don't know anything about it. So I do have this issue like, tenure, et cetera. So if you're worth anything, you're going to do something like this in getting involved in societal activities. And I did. And in fact, in that report, if anything, I spent most of my time, most of my effort on the nuclear nonproliferation chapters related to the fuel cycle. And so that's why it really is 4 decades, Homer, not 2. So let me say a few words, and then we'll have a discussion about the two areas that were discussed in the citation. Some of the nuclear security work during the Clinton years in the 1990s, and then more recently, of course, the Iran negotiation. I won't go into too much detail on specifics, but just try to extract a few broader lessons. Although I'm happy to go into more specifics if you would like. In terms of nuclear security in the 90s, many in this room certainly recall with the collapse of the Soviet Union and then Russia, the tremendous concern about the security of nuclear weapons and of nuclear materials. I served as undersecretary in the second Clinton term, and clearly we spent, I would say, a surprising amount of time, in the sense that when I went to DOE, I perhaps naively thought that I would be spending all of my time on science, the National Laboratory, user facilities, and energy. Well, it turned out there was an important problem at hand in terms of securing nuclear materials. The one issue that I will particularly focus on is the issue of the so-called megatons to megawatts deal. This was an idea that actually Tom Neff, another Stanford plus MIT physicist, had conceived of, in which 500 tons of Russian HEU from their weapons program would be converted into nuclear fuel for American nuclear power plants. By far, and I would say still to this day, by far the biggest program of ridding ourselves of weapons material. It was a 20-year effort was laid out. However, in the late 90s, the deal came to a halt. And it came to a halt, and I'm going to have a little parallel to the Iran negotiation. it was a much more technically complicated deal than was widely recognized. It wasn't simply taking 500 tons and sending it here. For one thing, politics is never very far from the discussion. American politics, what happens to American uranium miners? What happens to American fuel cycle activities? In Russia, it became a very delicate time in the late 90s in terms of the value ascribed to this deal. And so it fell apart around a natural uranium return to Russia. It required a negotiation, frankly, where the United States Department of Energy really had to step in, negotiating, strangely, a commercial transaction between Russia and 3 international nuclear companies, none of which was American. I won't go into great detail, but just to emphasize that bringing into the negotiation a capability to understand complex, in this case, fuel cycle activities and how one can pursue them to satisfy both technical and political aims in the 2 involved countries was absolutely essential. And the good news is that that deal went back on track. And in fact, shortly after I became secretary, at the end of 2013, the last of the 500 tons, in fact, came to the United States. It also shows that these kinds of arrangements, and I'm obviously hoping the same will be true in the Iran deal, can persist successfully over long periods of time if one is addressing, I think, the both, again, the technical aspects, the fundamental objectives, and the political requirements on both sides of the negotiation. So that takes us to the the more recent Iran negotiation. Again, there's a situation, actually, what I would say is the level of mistrust between the parties substantially greater than that we had at that period with Russia and the United States. Now, unfortunately, that relationship itself has got some strains today, and regrettably, the level of scientific exchange has been a victim of these discussions. But again, actually, I should have emphasized, as you all know, in the 90s, the fact that we had such consistent scientist-to-scientist exchange was tremendously important in allowing a rapid response to the danger of these nuclear materials and their lack of security. So that exchange was critical. Frankly, I think it's an area where today we are going to have to start rebuilding a lot of that in preparing for hopefully a return to greater collaboration, including in the critical areas of nuclear security, where Russia and the United States continue to have special responsibilities. So with regard to Iran, Homer mentioned some of the academic exchanges, and that's great. But frankly, this is not a very robust relationship in terms of the scientist-to-scientist exchange. So that was not something upon which we could rely. But the objective of the agreement to verifiably make sure that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapons program is one that, again, required significant amounts of technical knowledge intersecting with the political realities on both sides of the negotiation. I say both sides. I do want to emphasize it was not just the United States. It was a P5+1 plus the EU. But it's also well known that the United States played a strong lead negotiating role in reaching the agreement. When I say a different political needs on both sides, just to give one example, if you look at the Iraq heavy water reactor, and it's of course the major concern was that it would support a plutonium pathway to a weapon. When the deal was reached, what I want to emphasize is that Iran and the United States put out reports that seemed to be totally different. Never did either side say anything that was not correct in the agreement. But one can emphasize different areas. So, for example, with that reactor, we obviously emphasize that, number one, the core of that reactor has been taken out and filled with cement. We emphasize that all of the plutonium-bearing spent fuel will leave the country. We emphasize that a new reactor will be built under international oversight that dramatically reduces the amount of plutonium production. They emphasized we're still going to have a heavy water research reactor. That is absolutely correct. But that is, again, the nature of, I think, of the negotiation and of the political requirements. But up to now, again, I think, as most of you know, certainly the agreement is being implemented as it should be. Let me just say a few words about it in a little more detail, but not too much. The plutonium pathway I've already emphasized, that revolved around the Iraq reactor. On the uranium pathway, the key is that there's been a dramatic reduction in the number of centrifuges, and for quite some time there will be only the most primitive centrifuge in operation. Very importantly, and again, the kind of trade-off that one needs to make is a roughly 10 tons stockpile of low-enriched uranium has been reduced to 300 kilograms for 15 years, and that in turn is a major part of the confidence that we have in any attempted breakout taking quite some time, a minimum of 1 year. But what I really want to emphasize is that while those are very important, what is really important is the verification measures and new provisions for any non-proliferation agreement that have been put into place. This was recognized by a number of physicists. Dick Garwin, for example, well known in this group, pointed out that the additional protocol in this group, I think most of you know that that's the basis of access to undeclared facilities. For the first time, access through the additional protocol must be given within a fixed time period and not open-ended. That's new. Having surveillance of the uranium supply chain, that is new, and it will be a 25-year surveillance. In addition to forswearing nuclear weapons, which of course any NPT signatory does, this agreement for the first time says there will not be weaponization research. So there are many, many steps that have been taken here, and I think some, certainly Dick among them, I hope that eventually some of these measures will become part of the normal non-proliferation regime for all countries. So we will see, but this has been a substantial step forward. What I want to emphasize as a broader lesson is, while I became engaged in the negotiations last February, what I want to emphasize is the DOE nuclear security complex, and not only the nuclear security laboratories, but also science laboratories like Argonne, like Oak Ridge, like Pacific Northwest. They have been involved all the time, not only in this negotiation, but in any of the negotiations involving nuclear security. The point I want to emphasize is this is just one more example of the importance of sustaining year in and year out, decade in and decade out, a strong science and technology enterprise. You don't call on these things at the snap of a finger when you need them. So whether it's in nuclear security or in other realms, I think it just reinforces the critical role of our very, very strong science and technology enterprise. We can make it even stronger, as Homer and I were discussing earlier. But I think that's a very, very important lesson that we've tried to also elevate from the results of this negotiation. So I think I'm going to just end my remarks and have engage in some questions, some dialogue. But again, just to emphasize that this community, this physics community, has played, will continue to play, an absolutely central role in nuclear security and in so many other aspects of the intersection of science and critical societal needs. And again, in that context, it's certainly an honor for me to receive the Burton Award from so many of my friends here in the audience. Thank you.
Given the fact that once a country obtains nuclear weapons, it's in the club, so to speak, how long do you foresee a situation where countries like America maintain sort of sole possession of these nuclear weapons, right? I mean, how long is it before these technologies are able to proliferate more broadly?
Well, first of all, in terms of the U.S. situation, I should have maybe noted earlier as well, little advertisement. President Obama, of course, put forward in 2009, very early in his term, the so-called Prague Agenda, a broad agenda for both nuclear weapons and nuclear nonproliferation. And in fact, on March 31st, so just in a couple of weeks, basically, the fourth Nuclear Security Summit will be held here in Washington. We expect to have more than 50 countries present to discuss this agenda of securing nuclear materials globally. Now, in terms of the nuclear weapons stockpile, clearly there's been a strong commitment to continuing to reduce that. The long-term goal certainly is elimination of nuclear weapons. I think that the pace at which this can go now is going to start depending upon, as we start getting to 1,500, 1,000 lower, obviously we know that there are several other countries with substantial stockpiles. So what has been largely a bilateral issue historically between the Soviet Union, Russia, United States, at some point is going to have to get into a perhaps more complex multilateral frame to reach the ultimate goal. I do want to maybe just throw in one other factor, and that is the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. As many know, in the late 90s, it did not fare well in the Senate of the United States. I would just observe at this time that the two main objections at that time have been, I would argue, addressed through technology. One is the nearly complete global network of seismic detection, and the other is the science-based stockpile stewardship program that DOE put in place to assure safety and reliability of a shrinking stockpile without testing. I do want to note, again, for a physics community, I don't think the magnitude of that science accomplishment has been fully understood. There was a lot of technology that had to be invented to reach to reach domains of pressure and temperature that have not been reached otherwise, to develop the advanced high-performance computing capabilities. Again, there might be a misconception among some, I don't mean in this room necessarily, that, well, you know, you go to terascale and then petascale and then exascale, and you just keep buying some faster and faster transistors. That ain't the way it works. We are at the stage where the big advances come in architecture, in the software, the algorithms, et cetera. It really required, in many ways, there was the big push towards parallelism came through this requirement. So I think we've now reached, we're 20 years past the commitment by President Clinton in 1995 to pursue the non-testing, to sustain the non-testing paradigm. It's really a tremendous achievement, and again, it was the science community, the physics community that has allowed this to happen.
Hi, I'm Andrew Bergman from Harvard University. I apologize, this is a very untechnical question. I'm wondering, when I think of these negotiations with Iran, I think of sort of Secretary Kerry and a very small group of people in an intense room, just sort of having to negotiate. And I'm wondering what your experience was, not just as a technical advisor, but during these negotiations, sort of, what did you play a role similar to that in terms of actually having to pull for what you thought?
Well, yeah, I want to, first of all, don't want to be picky, but I want to emphasize that it was not a technical advisor.
Right.
This was a very unusual, to my knowledge, unique, at least up to now, situation in which the decision was taken just over a year ago to have basically co-negotiators because there were two decidedly different tracks that had to be resolved frankly, at a high level. One was the nuclear track, where I was fundamentally negotiating with Mr. Salehi, and John Kerry, obviously Secretary of State, and clearly the lead negotiator with the Foreign Minister Zarif. What was really absolutely essential is how on both, certainly on our side, and I sense on their side as well, the degree of cooperation, of working in parallel was really tremendous. And otherwise these things don't work. And I might add, not only for the United States and Iran, but once again, there were also negotiations among the P5+1, the P5+1 with Iran, very, very complex choreography. But at its core, there was a tremendous amount of, again, scientific and technically grounded discussion, and it occurred at every possible level: 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 4-on-4, and you name it. But again, strong technical team underpinning this all the time, and I think an interesting question is to what extent might this kind of be a model for other negotiations that have a strong technical component.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. My name is Farbod Shafi. I'm from University of Texas in Austin. Secretary Moniz, thanks very much for stepping up and making this mistrust between my country, Iran, and United States, at least from the scientific point of the view of the community. I know that first you mentioned that before this nuclear deal start between the two countries, there was kind of academic relationship between two countries to basically put this mistrust away. And I was wondering now, at this moment that the nuclear deal is closed or close to be closed, the relationship between two countries, specifically between the two countries' scientists, can be a little bit get better, because as an Iranian, as an example, as a scientist, Department of Energy National Lab, they don't allow me to work for the National Lab because I don't have the citizenship. I'm a permanent resident. And I was wondering if the Department of Energy and under your survey has any plan to step forward and make this relationship a little bit warmer between, at least between the scientist community of the two countries. Thanks.
So again, a very, very important issue. Clearly, let me again make it clear what the set of considerations is. First of all, the agreement is based upon verification and not trust. Secondly, we continue to have clearly a whole bunch of other issues between the United States, Israel, Gulf countries, and Iran, Hezbollah. We could go through the list, and those remain. Missile, obviously, the whole missile issues are very, very concerning. Now, having said that, clearly, and recognizing that verification is going to be absolutely core, having said that, obviously, we would all hope that this will prove to have been a beginning, which will take quite some time, of a fundamental change in relationship of Iran with its neighbors and with the United States. Now, part of that, certainly, I hope, will be increased scientific exchange. By the way, I just want to emphasize that no American citizen, including naturalized citizen, is excluded from DOE laboratories. I mean, other than the usual requirement for anybody, with if it involves a classified environment, for example, security clearance, et cetera. I just want to make that clear. So one part of the deal, by the way, was in fact to convert the underground enrichment facility at Fordo into a science laboratory. Now, one piece of that is moving forward already, and that is principally the Iranians working with Russia in terms of converting some of those centrifuges into stable isotope work, medical isotopes, industrial isotopes, et cetera. That's one example. But there is an interest in doing, including, well, Dr. Salehi has emphasized physics experiments, physics collaborations. So I think this is going to take a little time to develop, but that is certainly the intent, and that is certainly the interest.
Good morning. You just mentioned the importance of verification in the treaty. Suppose that Iran has a concealed facility or undisclosed material of which we are currently unaware. Does the treaty provide new mechanisms by which we might be able to discover such items?
Well, it's always an issue of looking for what you don't know, obviously. Now, clearly there are a number of means for finding or at least suspecting various sites. What the agreement does specifically is, well, one thing I already said, which is important, that is that once if there is a suspect site, there is a fixed time frame for access to that site. There's a process going through what's called a joint commission, but there's a fixed time frame. Secondly, I also mentioned this already, but put it in this context. There is there are novel elements of surveillance in terms of manufacture of sensitive centrifuge parts, in terms of uranium supply chain, that will all be under monitoring of the IAEA. There is also established a procurement channel so that any dual-use goods will go through there. Look, Jim Clapper, who is the Director of National Intelligence in the United States, has said, you can never say with 100% certainty that you will find everything you want to find. But he has said that the visibility that the international community, principally through the IAEA, will have has been elevated very, very dramatically. So certainly the risks of going outside the framework have been elevated dramatically if Iran were to choose to do that.
Peter Zimmerman, retired former arms controller. You brought up the CTBT, Ernie, and I'd like to push you just a little further on it and ask, do you see any rational hope of ratification in the next 4 to 8 years? If we do ratify, well, you'll remember we stuck in a very cumbersome entry into force provision so that we could capture India without naming the state. Do you see any way to bring the treaty itself into force? And finally, what can the physics community and appropriate NGOs such as FAS or any of the others do to help you to bring it into force, or to help the country get ratified and bring it into force?
Well, Pete, by the way, when we published together in 1969, that's kind of depressing, right?
What?
First of all, clearly, I don't see either ratification and certainly then not entry into force, in the immediate term. But the kind of time frame you talked about, I certainly think ratification is possible, but it's going to take a significant buildup to that point. That's where certainly the physics community and NGOs and others play a very, very important role. As you know, last fall, we did have a workshop on this, kind of to put it back onto the radar screen that there's this issue, and that as I said earlier, the objections raised in 1999, in my view, just don't apply anymore. Technology has resolved those issues. So I think it's now building up the conversation again in the United States, and that'll take years. And I have some hope that we can reach ratification. The entry into force issues are then, as you've said, more complicated. But all we can do is lead by example, and our leadership by example is, has a lot of influence. But I just think it's something that we should get back onto the radar screen and work at. It may be a decade, but let's work at it.
Well, tell us what you want this group of folks who are here to do, and we'll see what we can do to help.
Well, I think it's civil society having the kinds of discussions and moving that forward, and obviously an informed group like this is central. So I think there's no like one neon sign thing. It's getting this issue back onto the table, and being patient.
Thanks.
Okay. Herman Winnick, Emeritus Faculty at Stanford University and at the DOE-funded SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory. First, thank you for all your efforts on this Iran deal. I have to tell you that, of course, as you know, there are skeptics, and people like me and many others in this room have engaged in conversations with our colleagues and friends who expressed some skepticism. I've studied the deal in detail and believe that you have effectively closed down all the pathways toward a nuclear weapon in Iran for at least 10 years and probably more. And when it comes down to it, when I argue with my colleagues, I say when people like Ernest Moniz and Dick Garwin have done this and verified that they think it's good, that's good enough for me as well as my own analysis of it. But my question relates to your pointing out the importance of communications with the Soviet Union, scientific communications during the Cold War. There are scientific contacts now between Iran and the United States, particularly in the area of synchrotron radiation research, where Iran is a strong member of the Sesame Project in the Middle East, coming online later this year, started in 1997. In addition to their membership in Sesame, they have started their own national synchrotron light source. In that connection, they have invited people from all over the world. I've received many invitations to go there. I've been told, though, that it's DOE policy that even though I'm emeritus faculty at the SLAC National Laboratory, it would be inadvisable for me to go there. Has that now changed? Will DOE policy encourage the kind of scientific communication that you mentioned during the Cold War that should help us in bringing Iran into the international community? I would hope that I would be encouraged to go to Iran rather than discouraged.
Well, Herman, the policy issues are clearly broader than just DOE. I want to just emphasize that there are, cross-agency discussions that are important. But again, let me say first of all, I think you used the word inadvisable. You didn't use the word can't go, is what I heard. But because certainly there have been, including government officials, not government officials, Track 2, that's right, before they came back into government, there were a variety of visits to Iran. Certainly my interest is in seeing those scientific collaborations, those scientific contacts grow. I mean, I think that that's just as a general principle. I think it's got to be a good thing in the long term. So Herman, I support that, and by the way, I appreciate your persistence with Sesame, and I think you probably know we are actively again looking at what we might be able to do in that context.
I hope so. That would be very helpful. Yeah. You're right. I have not been forbidden to go to Iran, but it's been emphasized that it could be embarrassing to Stanford, SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory, and the DOE if it were known that I, as someone who had strong connections with the SLAC National Accelerator Lab, violated DOE advisories, at least, subject, as you said, to other agencies, discouraging that kind of communication. I hope that improves.
I think as long as the agreement stays solid for a while, we're 2 months into it. January 16th was implementation day, and I think these things just take a little while to kind of grow in. So.
Yes, I just want to announce that we have time for about 2 more questions. So maybe one on each side. Okay. Well, if there's only 3 people in line, we could probably do 3.
If they're short. Yeah. I have to go to the airport.
Thanks very much for your remarks. I'm Michael Lowenthal. I'm with the National Academy of Sciences. I'm also chairing the session on the Iran deal, Thursday, 11:15 for everyone. I wanted to ask you for that session, if you have some input on what the remaining technical challenges are with implementing the deal, but also for establishing confidence that Iran is going to be complying with its obligations going beyond the termination of the deal.
Well, in terms of moving forward, first of all, I would say the principal technical issues were resolved in the agreement, but there are various elements that need to be exercised. A prime one, I would say, is this procurement channel that I referenced earlier. I'm not saying that there's a fundamental issue. It's just, as with everything, until you exercise something, you don't learn everything that you need to learn to have it go smoothly. So there were things like that which have to be addressed. There are issues of Iran has accepted in the agreement there's a limit on the amount of heavy water. They are a heavy water manufacturer. And heavy water, obviously, as you know, has many applications well beyond nuclear research reactors or CANDUs. They are it's used in semiconductor industry, some medical applications, et cetera. So there's an example of I would say there's no fundamental problem, but it's a world in which vendor-customer relationships, are established over time. Well, for obvious reasons, they don't have those relationships, so that has to be built up. So I think it's more this question of getting the various pieces exercised and put into place, and IAEA making sure that it is exercising all the verification measures put in place.
Hi, John Miller from University of Houston. This is a different topic, but still under DOE's purview. In the area of trying to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, I understand that Bill Gates started up a coalition called the Energy Breakthrough Coalition, which purports to try to develop beyond just wind and solar. And I was wondering what DOE's plans were in the area, because I'm very skeptical that wind and solar are going to be enough, in other words, to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels. And so I'm curious about what your thoughts are, as far as from DOE's perspective.
The Bill Gates-led coalition, it's called the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, is 28 investors from 10 countries. However, what I want to emphasize, and this I think answers your question, is that was put together in parallel with another coalition called Mission Innovation. Mission Innovation is 20 countries that have pledged to seek a doubling of energy, science and technology R&D over a 5-year period. So the idea is open up the innovation pipeline. And by the way, those 20 countries represent between 80 and 85% of all of the global R&D in this arena. So it's a big leveraging. And the idea is that the innovation pipeline, roughly speaking, is now expanded, and that will provide more investable opportunities. And the Gates-led coalition will look for those opportunities with unusual risk tolerance, unusual patience for return, and a willingness to take some of the more promising ones all the way across the finish line to deployment. In our case, that will translate into we have a budget proposal before Congress for a 20% increase. That translates into more ARPA-E, more energy frontier research centers, and we could go on and on. And across the board, not just, well, you said wind and solar, renewables, efficiency, nuclear, and things like carbon capture and sequestration for coal, natural gas, and industrial facilities. Okay, I do really have to run. Last question.
Okay, I can be quick. I'm Young-Ki Kim from University of Chicago. My question, first of all, thank you for your the effort and time for making that successful negotiation. My question is about whether you have any advice or wisdom on how U.S. should approach a place like North Korea. What kind of preparation might be needed before even on the negotiation table?
Not really. That would be squarely in the Department of State's bailiwick at the moment. Look, I think clearly it's a very important problem, but what I want to emphasize more is that we should not overemphasize a parallel with the Iranian negotiation. It's quite different. for a whole bunch of reasons: the isolation of society, the role of China, or the well, yeah, the role of China is obviously critical, especially critical in that case. The fact that they obviously have nuclear weapons and missiles, so it's just a very, very different situation. I would say that it may be that it will reach a point where then the kind of science-based, technology-based approach will be important in the negotiation. I suspect we're not at that point yet. Yeah. Well, thank you very much again. Thank you, all of you.